This morning's panel wraps around FDA compliance, both domestic and international. It's a very hot topic now because we're seeing more and more regulatory compliance come down the pipeline and affect us. It doesn't just affect us on our own federal level, but it affects us more so at the state level. This morning's panel is a composition of incredible people from the industry. All have interesting stories to tell about how they got here. No road or no two paths are the same. I'm going to allow each panelist actually. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Liz.
Hi, my name is Liz Geiselman, and I am with Rocky Mountain Reagents, and 710 Spirits Extraction Products is our cannabis-facing line of chemicals. I've been in the industry now for about 12 years, and I have been in chemical sales for 22. I am also, let's see, what do I do here? I'm also on the board of directors for the National Cannabis Industry Association and serve on their subcommittee for product safety and manufacturing. I also served on the CHAMP initiative in Colorado, which was the Colorado Hemp Advancement Management Plan, where we addressed a lot of these issues there as well. And then I have been involved in politics for about 15 years, where I worked on getting policies in place at the state level. Yeah, and that's about it.
Rocco?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rocco Iannapolo. I'm the Director of Business Development for Cannabis Kitchen Supplies. We are a commercial equipment and supply provider to the industry based out of Boulder. Been there over 25 years serving the restaurant industry. And a few years ago, we started up a cannabis-facing channel, that being Cannabis Kitchen Supplies. So we supply commercial equipment, stainless steel tables, sinks, ovens, freezers, extraction supplies, PPE, your personal protective equipment, and wholesale packaging type stuff. So we're a one-stop shop to the industry. Our expertise is in supply chain optimization, so we help businesses basically source all of their equipment efficiently and cost effectively. I came from the corporate world, oil and gas, spent about 25 years doing various roles in that around compliance. And now I'm happy in the cannabis industry and got out of corporate America. So that's about it on me.
Sierra?
Hi, I'm Sierra Liggett, and I am Specialty Products Division Manager at Pack Worldwide, a manufacturer of pouches, flexible packaging, and we launched a brand, Bud Pack, a few years ago, specifically catered to the cannabis industry. So we work with a lot of brand owners in the cannabis industry and their producers and manufacturers to have their packaging custom printed or to help them through the labeling process at the local level to make sure that their packaging is branded properly and also compliant with FDA regulations. And before that, I was in flexible packaging in a similar space in product development with pouches and putting bigger brands into new package formats, and I am happy to have Bud Pack as my baby for the last few years.
Excellent. And Jonathan?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Havens. I'm an attorney. I'm a compliance and regulatory attorney. I co-chair the cannabis law practice at a law firm called Saul Ewing Arnstein and Lear. We're a national law firm, about 400 lawyers. I also co-chair our food, bev, and agribusiness practice. So as you can probably tell from my roles within the firm, I work at the intersection of the food and beverage industry and the cannabis industry. So I describe myself as the accidental cannabis attorney. I started my legal career at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which feeds into my experience and why I'm here today and my work with my clients. But in 2015, in my home state of Maryland, someone came to me and said, can you help us get licensed to grow process and dispense cannabis. And I said, I honestly have no idea what that looks like in Maryland, but we'll figure it out together. And that was it. So pretty much from 2015 until today, I've spent a large part of my focus in the cannabis space, both hemp and marijuana. And a lot of the work that I do in the CBD space intersects the federal and state overlay. So advising clients on FDA requirements, Federal Trade Commission requirements, and then all 50 states, really. So I'm a national CBD brand. How do I sell packaging and products that are compliant with Louisiana's laws and Oregon's laws simultaneously? And Sierra and I were talking in the pre-meeting about how do you have one set of labeling or packaging that complies with laws in all 50 states. Very difficult to do, but one of the things that we try to do is come up with packaging that will check as many boxes as you possibly can without bankrupting yourself on 20 different varietals of your labeling. So in any event, that's a little bit about me, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Thank you so much. In addition to doing compliance and regulatory standards as well, like he does, I also have a brand. So my brand is Cannabidiol Life, and the struggle and the ongoing struggle is, as he said, meeting both state and federal requirements, and for those of us who are traveling now into international markets, how we meet those. So in your opinion, what are the top 5 issues you see in non-compliant products today? Rocco?
Non-compliant issues. So from my perspective, working with clients, we see it's more on the back end. My experience, I don't have a lot of experience with regards to labeling, which certainly is probably the biggest topic that we could talk about here today. But before you even get to that, there are a number of different jurisdictions that have purview over your operations, and we see in my space anyways, sourcing issues. So when you're sourcing ingredients and not tracking things properly, even coming down to the equipment that you use while you're manufacturing your products, they may not be NSF compliant, or there's a whole host of different regulations that would apply, again, depending on which state you're in and which jurisdiction you're in. But the biggest thing I would say is that business owners don't always know what they don't know, and they try to figure it out on their own, and they usually end up learning lessons the hard way there. So my advice there would be to engage with subject matter experts that are paid to know that stuff and work with them, and don't try to learn it on your own, because it will result in lots of bumps and bruises along the way.
Sierra, can you add to that?
Yeah, definitely. We often work with our clients in finding what the local regulations will say and how we need to meet that with the printing and labeling of the package. But every single time we always say, send this to your attorney, go over it with your attorney, and make sure that you understand how this is interpreted, and make sure that you're meeting every single one of these. One of the labeling topics that we were talking about earlier was Indiana. I'm a Hoosier, by the way, from Indiana, and we have a unique spot in the industry because we are all CBD. We didn't take the medical route first, like the other states. So we created this stringent list, and I printed it off. I'm not going to read it all for you, but it is a really nice long list of everything that you need to have on your labeling. There is a QR code that you use that kind of helps you save a sticker, but often you're still going to need multiple different labels on your packaging. So Avery.com is a label company. They have a really nice example if you want to go there. This is a really nice layout of how your label should look and making sure that you're checking all of those boxes. So going to Indiana's state website for how the CBD labeling should have, make sure you're checking all of those boxes. Go to Avery and see how that label is laid out. There's some really good resources that we direct our clients to.
Beautiful. Jonathan, you deal on the regulatory side of things about the time that it becomes the cost of a retainer. Would you say, in your opinion, that it would be smarter to get out ahead of this before somebody winds up in your office having to defend this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm well aware of the startup nature of a lot of the businesses in this industry, and we work with companies of all sizes. But a lot of people are penny wise, pound foolish. So, let's say you have someone review your first set of labels, and then you use what they give you to standardize the process at your company, right? It's going to be a lot less. It's not going to be necessarily inexpensive to do that, but it's going to be a lot less expensive than if a plaintiff's attorney comes knocking on your door and says, hey, you told me that this product was going to do X, Y, and Z. Or you told me that my client wasn't going to fail a drug test after they took this product and they failed a drug test. So, look, I'm not here to tell you that you absolutely have to hire an attorney to do everything related to your business, but there are certain questions that you should be asking. I mean, Rocco and Sierra talked about, the inputs of the product. Rocco more specifically, making sure that you're dealing with hemp instead of marijuana if you're in the hemp CBD space, right? The line between federally legal product and federally illegal product is 0.3% to 0.31%, right? So with that thin margin of error, if you have a broad, if you have a full spectrum product, and there's THC in your product, you want to make sure that the variability from batch to batch isn't going to get you above that 0.3% line. So I think there are some questions upstream and downstream that you should be asking that, whether it's an attorney or whether it's a consultant or some combination of both can help with to lower your burden in the long run. Because again, if, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration comes knocking, Controlled Substances Act violations are very expensive and also carry jail time, not just money. So I get it. You don't want to spend your money on an attorney, but I think it can sometimes be a lot less money on the front end than on the back end. That's my personal influenced opinion as an attorney, I guess I would say.
And I'd just like to add to that, I think it's incredibly important if you're starting a brand to use a regulatory consultant. Because when you're dealing with, you could be dealing with as many as 15 agencies. And when you have to layer regulation from USDA to FDA to food chemical, and your fire regulations by state and your fire regulations by your county, it becomes very, very costly, and it takes a lot of time to figure all that out. And if you get it wrong, you could be facing a lot of fines. We are an FDA-regulated facility, and when those regulators come in, they spend 3 days in your facility going over every single record. And if you're in violation, you're going to pay the fines. So I would just say, get out in front of it, use a regulatory consultant, because it can be very, very costly and take a lot of your time.
And I'll
We have a question real quick, just related to that. My understanding, the FDA isn't regulating right now cannabis. It's not admitting that it's a drug. It's not admitting that it's a food. So when you guys mentioned this compliance, there isn't compliance regulatory. All we can do is go from the standards they set with things that are in that. Sorry, I don't know if you're doing a live question thing.
We generally wait to the end, but I'll answer that. When we first started in this industry, what we saw were people creating these products in back rooms, bodegas, garages, in the name of medicine. As a parent who stepped into this industry for the health and wellness of my own child and all the hundreds of other kids that marched into Colorado for this opportunity, it became fearful because some of our kids had allergies that nobody was taking into consideration, and it was coming out of the environments, and we were having complications, and there were issues. And the FDA started to get a hold of it. And over the course of the 7 years that we've had and been in this industry, we've literally created history. There is definitive language and law that speaks to compliance. The law says with absolute clarity that if it exceeds that 0.3% THC, be it 9, 8, 10, or 11, it's non-compliant. It becomes cannabis, and at the point in time that that moves, it's trafficking. There is no gray area. Anybody that tells you that there's a gray area is putting you at risk. And the question now becomes, what's the retainer worth? If you want to continue the conversation, I'm sure that any one of us would welcome that. We're always open to the dialogue and the conversation.
The only other thing I would add is, so I would take slight exception with what you said in terms of it not being regulated. So the FDA has actually said definitively that they view CBD as a drug ingredient. What people confuse is the absence of enforcement with legality.
Correct.
So to date, the FDA is really only going after products that make more aggressive claims, right? PTSD, COVID, AIDS, HIV. I know you're thinking, oh, these are crazy examples. CBD brands are out there marketing on these claims. The states are actually much more active. So I would say that FDA does regulate in this area. They just haven't been super active unless you're really thumbing their nose in it to say, hey, come after us. We're making really dangerous, aggressive, unsupported claims. But the states have said a variety of different things, right? Ingestibles and topicals, nothing at all. There's some states that still treat this as a controlled substance. So it's a know before you go mentality. But, the FDA has kind of been figuring out what it wants to do, hasn't quite figured it out yet. But it's, if someone asks you, is this federally regulated? You say, yes. However, federal regulators have largely been hands-off absent those more aggressive claims, at least to date. That could change today, tomorrow. It's subject to change. So, nuance, I think, is important just so that if you're talking to an investor or a business partner or a local regulator, you want to sound accurate in terms of convincing them that you know what you're dealing with so that they don't say, well, you told me this wasn't regulated and FDA was okay with this. Well, that's not, it's not exactly the case. So in any event, I just wanted to say that.
When the FDA sent out letters to 15 recipients and brands a year ago, November, the average cost to correct, I took on 5 of those projects. The bill starts at $50,000. It's no joke. Moving on. Why is the panel of ingredients and facts so key to the whole of the product? And how do you think distribution will affect this? Sierra.
Well, if you look at dietary supplements and how that's regulated, that's really the best example for how the labeling should work. And why it's important is because consumers need to know what's in the product, and you also have a responsibility to traceability if there's ever a recall. So Indiana has specifically said in your ingredients list, here's exactly how you need to write all of your ingredients. And I think that's pretty helpful. It's especially important through your distribution to make sure that you have all of those labels proper for that individual state requirements of that label.
And how does that play into e-commerce and online commerce?
That's where I think it gets a little gray because, even I've had the experience where I purchased something out of state, and the state that I purchased it from, the labels meet those local regulations, but it doesn't meet Indiana's. So there's definitely gray area right now with e-commerce.
So last year in my state of Florida, I moved from Colorado. My state of Florida imposed registration of product. Prior to that, the only other state to impose that was the state of Utah, the cost to register each SKU. So if you have one product and it has different milligrams in that same line, each one of those is $300 to register within the state, has to be traceable all the way back to its origin, plant origin. Every state started to come online for that, and it was not until this year that we learned that each state had a different requirement. My labels passed for the state of Florida with winning colors. It was so amazing that they used us as an example as each then manufacturer and production company started coming online in the state. But then my labels got kicked back from the state of Louisiana and the state of New York. So Sierra and this team is absolutely correct. It is different for every state. And then when you start going international, that becomes a whole nother animal. Mexico and Canada are about to pull the trigger. I'm so excited. Okay. How does this impact the U.S., and how will our trace and accountability fit into the international trade, in your opinion? Anyone?
Well, I would just talk about, you're right, we don't have FDA regulations on CBD products, but I know that ASTM, if you're familiar with that organization, they're currently they're in a 3-year project to write all the SOPs for the testing of pesticides, metals, those types of things. So I think that probably is going to happen within the next 6 to 8 months. The ASTM is going to have that standard, and it's being charged out of the European Union. So we're going to have a lot of, and I think honestly, that's probably what the FDA is waiting for, because there's no reason to duplicate work. And they've already they're going over nomenclature right now. They're going over SOPs. They're going over acceptable quantities, testability, equipment, procedures, process. So I think once ASTM kind of comes through, the FDA will probably follow pretty closely behind with some of that ruling. And I think that's going to ease products going across international lines in a much greater way, because I believe that Canada and Mexico are also part of that discussion with the ASTM. So I would definitely be kind of looking at that. I think it's D37 is all of the cannabis that's going under ASTM. And there's lots of subcommittees and work groups and stakeholder meetings in this space right now. So it's a great place to kind of get into it and talk to other people in the industry. And it's also a fantastic thing to have for your company to have worked on some of these subcommittees. So
Thank you. So we do have 6 minutes left. Open forum, questions.
Jessica, just one thing I'll add on. If you are planning to do any kind of international business, definitely get help, whether it be a consultant or an attorney, in regards to what standards you need to meet. I know that I have been working with some clients that have CGMP, but that's not good enough to go into Europe, for example. You have to have the EU GMP certification.
Which
So
is another level.
making sure that you understand what certifications and what your facility standards need to be able to ship to whichever countries you want to do business in is definitely time well spent.
So insider information, the FDA equivalent in the UK and throughout Europe is called novel foods. Mexico is called COFEPRIS, COFEPRIS. Those are great resources for you to better understand international market requirements. Any other questions on the floor?
I just wanted to address what I think there's been a lot of gray area for the bulk manufacturers regarding in-process material being greater than 0.3. I know that we've been a little confused because we've heard both sides of the story. So where are we actually at regarding in-process material in a facility that's coming out of an extractor, out of a distillation unit before remediation that's greater than 0.3%?
So the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration last summer issued what can only be an acceptable term in Washington, D.C., an interim final rule. It's like the oxymoron of all oxymorons. There's this, my favorite acronym in the industry, WIPE, Work in Progress Hemp Extract, right? So it comes into the facility, the processing facility at 0.3 or less, and it leaves at 0.3 or less. So what about the intermediary? I've been told, and I assume you would agree, but let me know if you disagree, that it's virtually impossible to not have a hot work in progress hemp extract. You're shaking your head, so good. I'm not completely over my skis here. What I tell clients is technically WIPE that goes above 0.3% is illegal. However, and this is a big however, I am not aware of a single enforcement action to date or any sort of priority from the DEA in terms of going into processing facilities. Now look, if you're going into a facility hot and you're coming out hot, that's trafficking, right? No question. But if you're remediating it at the facility and it's a natural, upscaling, so to speak, a natural going from say 0.3 to 0.9 or something like that, and you're remediating it, I think from an enforcement perspective, you're okay. But from a law perspective, if you want my honest assessment, my opinion is that it's illegal, but there's nothing to do about it. And I think DEA is aware of the fact that there's nothing to do, which leads to my point of it not being an enforcement priority. So it's an issue. DEA is aware of it. I don't know that they care nearly as much as industry does, but there are ongoing comments to the docket involving this interim final rule. So it could be addressed, but I think there are bigger issues, bigger fish to fry as far as DEA is concerned. So, the short answer, illegal, long answer, illegal, but I don't see a material risk there because I don't think DEA is focused on it. And if they did, there wouldn't be an industry, and I think they know that.
So I know that there's a lot of places out there that allow for tolling, so you can send your bulk material to a company and then they remediate it for you. It's not everybody has that, ability. So technically, right, that would be trafficking. Then?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're exporting a hot material to another facility.
So, yeah, at the point in time that you're making a transport, the original Farm Bill of 2014 said that if they came out and tested plant material raw in the fields, and that plant material or any stage of that plant material up to its point of extraction tested over that 0.3, you had to actually dig a hole and bury it. You couldn't burn it, you couldn't extract it, you couldn't remediate it. You had to dig a hole and bury it. I promise you this, in 6 years in Colorado, and I know every farm there is in the state, nobody ever buried their hemp. The rule of thumb, or our perspective, was that there wasn't somebody standing there, right, waiting for it to happen. Common sense plays out. The understanding that you're dealing with a live molecule. It's live, it's active. And there's no telling what that molecule is going to do or convert itself into, right? We talk about CBG, CBN, they're all conversion molecules. So it's impossible. And when that came out, we all lost our minds. Trust me, me first of all, on the phone with the attorney. Always err on the side of caution. We're steamrolling and have come miles in this process from where we all started. And I, kind of going along with the history of where we started. Common sense prevails, and doing your best to do it right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just talking about compliance with different isomers. I'm just curious from maybe an attorney standpoint or anyone's standpoint on the panel. Hello. Okay. Well, I'm just curious why, with the 2018 Farm Bill, would they go out of their way to specify Delta 9? Why not just say THC? And the reason is, my rationale is I am a chemist. I never knew there were different isomers of THC. Clearly, somebody with an advanced knowledge of this space wrote that bill. So when we say this gray space isn't compliant with the CSA versus the hemp bill, I know I'm not going to here to argue like law. I'm not a law guy. I'm a technical guy. I just am curious what your perception is on why would they go and specify an isomer? Why would you shoot yourself in the foot like that?
Because that's the only language and nomenclature that we had at the time that they knew. And Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta 11 is all new. These kids wake up one way, I don't know how they get to it, I'll be honest with you. And every week you think you're ahead of it, and then you're behind again. When Delta 8 came along, I was like, the heck? What the hell? It moves faster than we can keep up with it. And at the time of the writing, you're talking about politicians. They don't ask us for our opinions. They ask us for our commentaries after the fact. Anybody want to?
Well, and I'll just add to that. I think that also the only standards, right? So anytime you're testing for THC, Delta 9 specifically, you have to standardize your equipment with the standard. There were no standards for any of these other things. They didn't exist. I think a lot of this stuff comes out of some of these bulletin boards with some of these kind of chemical cowboys going out there and doing some crazy stuff.
Chemical cowboys.
I mean, that's how we got vitamin E acetate in our vape products, right? I mean, people are doing some insane stuff out there, especially in the legal, not legal markets for marijuana. And my thought to that is I wish that people would kind of stop playing around with the chemistry and work on getting medical marijuana passed. And then that just alleviates a lot of this because people are going to continue to try and find something that is going to mirror THC Delta 9 in non-legal states until they make it legal.
And they're already on it, and again, it's all personal perspective. I fight Delta 8. And the reason I fight the Delta 8 is because I've seen what it does. And I've seen those kids at 18 years old walk out the store with the vape pen in their hand and get behind the wheel of a lethal weapon. So from the compliance standpoint, there's a lot of us that fight for the safety of that because we're fighting for a medicinal right to a natural product that is the polar opposite of a synthetic. Any other questions?
Well, I'd like to just have a comment about something you said earlier. There were 15 companies that were fined, and that was November of 2020. 2019. But they are going every month. So I would be checking the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, their website, and read what they're being violated for. They will give you a complete perspective as to what, I mean, even if it just says scientifically proven, this company was fined $20,000. One of my clients who is, above board in every sense of manufacturing, because he made a minor claim about pain relief and anxiety relief, he was charged $75,000. This is not, that's not a joke on the labeling side. That's why I think it's really important that you get compliant labeling and you work through that. And there's no real negotiation with the federal government on this stuff because I think mostly they just don't want this to be a thing. Definitely take a look at the website because it is really surprising. Some of the claims are outrageous. Some are nuances in language.
And you're not exempt for e-commerce. E-commerce is considered state commerce. So if you're selling into states that's not legal, you can't sell, let's say, inhalable products, and you sell e-commerce inhalable product to somebody in that state, you're subject to the fine and or consequences. So it's becoming more and more complex and more regulated.
The other thing is, as a former federal regulator, I can tell you it's very easy for regulators to go online and go to your checkout menu and see where they can ship products to, especially during COVID. You might say, oh, well, people are in their office, not in their offices more, they're at home, they're just, looking on the internet, right? It's very easy for people to tell where you ship your product. So statements on your website like, we don't ship these products to these states, or, having the inability of your drop-down menu to send certain products to certain states. Those things become important. Some people say, well, you know what? I'm just going to sell vapes and foods and cosmetics in all 50 states. I'm going to make whatever claims I want. You can do that. And there are some companies that have done that and have been okay. But I don't want to use a cliche, but it's a little bit like Russian roulette in that if you have more aggressive claims and you're selling vape products in a state that specifically bans vaping products, many states do in this space, you're essentially playing with fire. And about the FDA warning letters, getting a warning letter in and of itself, not the biggest deal. I mean, the publicity issue is a problem. The problem is the next day you're going to get a demand letter from a plaintiff's attorney saying, I have a class of putative plaintiffs here who are going to sue you. I mean, FDA is a little bit, and no denigration of my former employer, it's a little bit of a paper tiger. They send you a piece of paper. The problem is they put it on their website for everybody to see before it's resolved, right? And it's not just the FDA, as you said, it's the Federal Trade Commission who enforces advertising and substantiation. So you have to substantiate your claims with FTC. You have to make sure it's a safe product with FDA. You have to deal with the plaintiff's attorneys, millions upon millions. So I guess what I'm saying is, you might think getting a warning letter, no big deal. Well, if you're doing something bad enough to get a warning letter, there are going to be other people knocking at your door.
That warning letter will cut off your banking, cut off your merchant services, and blacklist you. That's just one example. Anyone else?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have one more.
Sure.
So what takes a product from being a recreational product to being something that would be considered pharmaceutically compliant? There's companies manufacturing THC-containing products in the medicinal space, and those are pharma companies. So this might be more of a technical question, or how do you go with the FDA about preparing a product to be pharmaceutical grade?
So what's interesting is you have 37 states with medical cannabis programs, or at least have paved the way with laws or referendum. And then you have 17 of those states adult use. And then you have the FDA, which regulates, among other things, pharmaceutical products, as you said. If you want FDA to recognize your ability to sell your product in interstate commerce in all 50 states and make a claim about it, you're generally talking a new drug application, clinical trials, multiple phases of clinical trials, safety and effectiveness review, all those sorts of things. What's interesting is you have these 37 unique intra-state programs where you have qualifying conditions, right? Epilepsy or chronic pain. And growers, processors, dispensaries can market on those qualifying conditions. The federal government, Medicare, Medicaid, those sorts of things, that needs to go through full-blown FDA review like any other drug product, like Epidiolex did, GW Pharmaceuticals product, right? That product is a cannabis product that can be sold. There's a scheduling order from DEA, but don't confuse that. I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying generally. Don't confuse that with what state medical cannabis operators are doing, which is just saying, the state has said, if you have these conditions, you can get a medical cannabis card, and here, take this product. Truth be told, the dispensary should not be saying, well, this strain is good for epilepsy, and this strain is good for chronic pain, because there's not substantiation, as FDA would consider it, to make those sorts of specific recommendations. So I get it, it's overlapping and confusing, but there's this divorce between the 37 states with medical cannabis programs and the federal drug regulatory process. There's a big gap in between those two things.
And I'll confuse that matter just slightly further. My brand we were just administered in Brazil and Peru in Q1. We had to go through their medical program and their approvals in order to be distributed as a pharmaceutical drug. Every country, again, every state, completely different. We're making history. So it's impossible to expect we have all the answers today.
So just a follow-up. Hello. Okay. If companies have already gone through the review with the FDA to generate that an active pharmaceutical ingredient is in fact making those medical claims and it's been approved by the FDA, then can't I just manufacture hypothetically the same active pharmaceutical ingredient, say isolated Delta-9, and make the same claims that have already been approved by the FDA with another company? Or is it individual entity based?
So the first one is going to be a new drug application, and then if FDA decides, they can issue what's called a monograph for over-the-counter drugs, right? Like they've done with NSAIDs or acetaminophen, right? A lot of people can manufacture Advil and Tylenol, but the first company that did it had to go to FDA and say, hey, this isn't going to kill people, right? Here are the conditions, and FDA had to make a drug facts panel to say, here's how much you take, here are the indications it's for, here are the contraindications, so on. But because FDA has only approved one true cannabis-derived drug, which is Epidiolex, and doesn't have a monograph for an over-the-counter version for any cannabis-related products. There's Marinol and Dronabinol, and there's other products, but they're not true. They're kind of synthetic derivations. My point is, there's not the infrastructure at the FDA to allow for that. They might go down that road at some point. My guess is until cannabis is not Schedule I and it can actually be researched like another substance is researched without all the federal restrictions, it's going to be a long time before that happens. But that doesn't exist yet.
You would still have to apply.
You would still have to do some sort of an application, whether it's an abbreviated new drug application or some sort of, the FDA is not, at least in the current regime, yes, you would have to do some sort of it could be abbreviated, it might be less clinical trials, but it would still be an application.
And even if the monograph exists, you still have to register with the FDA every year with what you're making and how you're making it and all of those things, and they'll come in and make sure that all of that is going on. So you still have to have an FDA licensure to even do the monograph.
Right, great point. Drug GMPs and facility inspections and registration with FDA and recall procedures, and so it's not like. That's not the end of the story. It's kind of the start, right? It's like, okay, now we've cleared the first hurdle. Oh, there's 11 more hurdles to go. It's doable, but it's
expensive.
It's kind of like when people talk about legalization. Well, that's going to be the end of it, right? Which we're just going to be able to sell this wherever we want. It's the start in terms of here are the agencies that regulate, here's who you need to talk to, here's what you need to do, that sort of stuff.
If you want a really good idea about the blueprint, go study the end of Prohibition and our liquor licenses and how all of that works at the TABC, because that really is where we're headed. We've had a great panel today. Thank you very much. If you happen to be from the great state of Indiana, come see the Hoosier. The girls got all the intel. Let me tell you what. I wish we had this in Colorado and Florida before we got there. Thank you so much. I hope you guys are enjoying the expo. Be sure and check in if you have any questions.